first of all, we need to explain why we think costing is so important that we have a whole program about it. One thing about costing is that, of course, you need to cost your measures or activities to know how much money you need for them and to know whether you have this money. And the second thing is it forces you to plan very precisely, because if you want to know how much money you need, first you need to know precisely what you intend to do. And when you know what you intend to do, then also you can make a good argument for, like Ministry of Finance or donors, that you really need this money because you know what you will spend it on and why it will be useful. And the third part, which is very important for economic reform programs, is that the costing of measures in the structural reforms part is a link with the fiscal part, with the budget part, and ERPs are fiscal documents as well. So you need costing to be able to make this link between your policy measures and your budget planning and budget outlook. So that's why, we also decided to prepare a guidance. It's not a prescription, it's not a rule book that you need to follow 100%, but it is there to have standardization. So when we look at tables in different ERPs from different countries, we know what the lines mean, we know what is there, what isn't there, and we can compare countries and we can compare measures between each other, and you also know what you are communicating, so you are clear about your costs. Before we had this methodology, each country was left to do whatever way they wanted to do costing, and now it's a little bit of a straitjacket, but it has the benefit of being comparable and knowing how to do things exactly.
What are the key steps to be observed in costing the structural reforms? First and foremost, a good definition and articulation of your reform is important. So you should have clear aim and the goal, what you want to achieve with your structural reform. First step in the bottom-up costing is to articulate all the activities as clearly and precisely as possible with expected outputs, meaning the number of buildings, the kilometers of roads, the social transfers, the needed IT equipment and familiar. Then you should estimate the input required in terms of staff, IT systems, transfers needed. So when you have this, you should estimate these inputs by type, like gross salaries, goods and services that include VAT. These are, for example, training, expertise, equipment, and other utilities or costs. Additionally, you should have the inputs like subsidies and transfers and capital expenditures. Be aware that all of these you have to estimate for the 3 years. The first year is the year of the ERP, and then also for the following next 2 years. After you have this, you should estimate the cost of required inputs for each activity. Here it is very good to have unified reference prices to be comparable, or you have to base on the estimation of beneficiaries or invest program or some document that is relevant. The next step, you define the funds available, meaning like state budget, local budgets, or some non-budgetary funds. But it is very important that your funds are available and approved, like existing IPA project or approved grants or approved loans. So after you have all of this, you can fill both of the tables, the 10A and the 10B. But again, be careful. Only additional and first level costs should be calculated in the tables, so only those costs that are directly linked to the measure. And again, if your structural reform is based on more activities, for each activity you should have separate table. So now you have all the inputs, and good luck with your filling the tables.
how to calculate structural reform effects according to the costing methodology and economic reform program tables 10A and 10B. In this section, we will explore the case study which is called shortening of the unemployment benefit period. So this is a case which takes part in the labor market. Currently, the workers who get sacked are entitled to 24 months of employment benefits. That is the maximum that they can get. It is deemed too long and not just, as too many workers actually exit the labor market and wait to meet the criteria to enter the pension system as unemployed. So they are receiving the unemployment benefit for the full 24 months period. The annual cost of this unemployment benefits is 100 million euros, half of which is contributed to the short-term period unemployment, so the guys who come in and out for a couple of months, and the other half, so 50 million, is contributed to these so-called long-term period unemployment, so 50 million. And the reform is constructed in such a way that this maximum period is shortened from 24 to 18 months. So the thing is that the reform is adopted in X-1, and so the effects come in year X, but the right to the 24-month unemployment benefit is not changed for the existing unemployed. So when we do the calculation, in the first year, so in year X, there is no change, as the long-term unemployed still have their rights, and the short-term unemployed are the same. So with the same number of unemployed, the change is zero. We would write zeros in tables 10A and tables 10B. We expect the full time of this structural reform to take place in X+2, and that is 12.5 million of savings, because the right of the long-term unemployed will only have a full effect in this year. It will be entered as minus 12.5 million in the subsidies and transfers column in 10A table. Usually, these costs are paid from the central budget, so in 10B, this will show again as a negative 12.5 million of savings in central budget. In X+1, we do the calculation in such a way with the pre-assumption that if it's the same number of unemployed, then the short-term unemployed have the same rights, so nothing changes, they are not affected by the reform, whereas the long-term unemployed, the benefit is shortened, remember, from 24 to 18 months, so the annual cost of this cohort is not 50 million, but 37.5 million. However, in this first year, we can only assume that it's going to be half of those people, because they get their rights running every day. So there will be this half savings in X+1. So the saving in this X+1 is 6.25 million, which is entered as minus 6.25 in table 10A, and again the central budget saving minus 6.25 in table 10B.
We have been now helping countries to do costing of their economic reform programs for 2 years. What, in our experience, was the most difficult part of costing, and first thing that comes to mind to all of us, I think, is plan the measures or present the measures in such a way that you can actually cost them. So if you have very general activities like we will improve something or we'll do something general, then there's no way you can know how much this will cost. Or you have a costing table but you don't see the link. So this is actually how we check the measures. We read the description of activities, the little text on costing, and then we check whether, okay, the numbers in the tables we can connect with the activities of the measures or not. It doesn't mean you need to present every detail and every euro where it goes, but there needs to be clarity. What are the main costs, where most of the money will go, what are the key activities that it cost most. So there has to be clarity. And very often, we start reading, we start our help to develop measures with this part, is it costed well? And then we say we don't understand these costs, and then we find out that actually what we don't understand is what you intend to do with the measure. And then people explain to us from line ministries, and very often the problem is only it wasn't written well. So there was clarity about what you want and how you came to the cost estimates, but it wasn't clear to the reader. So a lot of things is, this is one difficult part, to be really clear in your plans so that everyone can understand them. The second difficult thing is to be realistic. The most difficult thing of realism, I think, and we don't often think about it, is to be realistic when you plan implementation of the measure. Very often, if not typically, it happens that people want to look good when they present their measures. So therefore they promise a lot. So plan what you think you can realistically do with the resources, human resources, time that you have. Otherwise, you plan a lot, then you plan too much, then you also plan that it costs a lot, and then you say, I don't have money. Well, maybe you have money for what you really can do. You don't have money for what you have promised to do, but maybe that was too much, So you really don't need this money that year. So be realistic about what you can do, and then also in the costs, be realistic in the sense don't say it will be cheap, and also don't inflate the costs too much just to get more money. But of course, one can ask, or you will maybe ask, how can we be realistic when there are so many uncertainties and risks? But we know that, it's clear that you cost something, measures that will happen in future. So there's always uncertainty. Nobody knows a lot about future. So it's the same with your costing, Today, you know what you know. Based on that, you make your best estimate. You explain it. You also explain the risk. If something is very uncertain, for example, if you don't know how many beneficiaries there will be, well, there'll be, a lot of companies apply for one grant or a small number. Talk about this uncertainty, explain it, explain your assumptions. Say we assume that so many companies, but maybe it will be a little bit more, a little bit less. If there are some serious risks to funding, for example, or to cost overruns, also there's a section in the ERP measure where you can talk about these risks, So as a final word, it's difficult, but nobody expects you to be perfect. Nobody expects you to be 100% following methodology. What we expect you is to make a costing which is clear, so that when we look at it, we know what you are planning, how you came to these numbers. So the most important thing is you need to explain yourself. And in our experience now, after 2 years of working with different teams in different countries, you do have the skills to do this. And definitely, you are the ones who know your measures best. So, or if you are in the role of coordinator, you know best the people you can ask for clarifications. And what you want to do, or you have to make your mind clear, and then costing becomes easy. So definitely you can do it. It's not too difficult.